who have ever disappeared. Some who followed the case of Chicago candy heiress Helen Brach say there is new ground to cover.
A Northwest suburban equestrian center that inside...
Have you ever wondered what it takes for a woman worth $125 million to vanish without a trace? Not flee. Not hide. But simply disappear. No body. No clues. No explanation. Just silence, cold as steel, and the haunting realization that money can buy everything, except safety. Helen Brach believed her fortune was a shield. But for some, it was a target. Her name may sound sweet, Brach, like the candy empire she married into. But her story would become one of America's most chilling disappearances, wrapped in wealth, whispers, and betrayal. It all began on February 17, 1977, in Glenview, Illinois. Helen, 65, wealthy, independent, and widowed, left her mansion for a routine checkup at the famed Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. She never arrived. Days later, her luxury car was found at O'Hare Airport. Empty. No luggage. No records of a flight. No witnesses. No cameras. No goodbye. Helen Brach had vanished. She wasn't just anyone. Helen was the widow of Frank Brach, founder of the multi-million-dollar candy company E.J. Brach & Sons. Her wealth in 1977 was estimated at $20 to $24 million. Today, that's the equivalent of over $125 million. She lived like American royalty. A sprawling estate in Glenview. Winters in Florida. Private jets to Europe to purchase championship horses. And above all, a deep love for animals, especially horses. Helen was no trophy widow. She ran her life, managed her wealth, and gave generously. Her foundation donated millions to animal welfare. Shelters called her their guardian angel. Yet, in her world of charity and champagne, danger crept in, wearing a suit and a smile. Behind the glamour of show horses and elite auctions lay a dirty secret: horse scams, fraudulent sales, inflated prices, insurance schemes. And Helen, with her generous heart and open checkbook, became a target. One name kept surfacing: Richard Bailey. A charming horse dealer with a dark past. He courted wealthy women. Promised them prize-winning horses. Sold them dreams, then pocketed their money. And Helen was next. Before she vanished, Helen grew anxious. Friends said she seemed unsettled. Like someone who had seen something she shouldn't have. Some believe she discovered the scam. Some believe she threatened to go to the authorities. And some believe she didn't live long enough to. But here's the terrifying truth. When you're worth $125 million, and you become an inconvenience, you don't just disappear. You get erased. If you ask anyone in Chicago's equestrian circles back then about Richard Bailey, they'd lower their voice. Not out of fear. Out of shame. Because so many people knew what he was doing, and no one stopped him. Bailey was slick. Suave. The kind of man who could talk to a woman twice his age and make her feel 30 again. He'd whisper promises of champion bloodlines, dinners at country clubs, and horses just about to win big, always just one investment away from glory. To lonely, wealthy widows like Helen Brach, he was more than a salesman. He was the dream they didn't know they were buying into. But Bailey didn't just sell overpriced horses. He sold illusions. And when illusions crack, they leave behind more than broken dreams. They leave behind motives. Helen had bought horses through Bailey, expensive horses, later deemed worthless. She had spent hundreds of thousands. By 1977, she started asking questions. Too many questions. It's believed she found out about the insurance fraud rings, the horses being injured or killed for payouts, the fake pedigrees, and the bribes to keep it all hidden. She was preparing to go to the police. And just like that, Helen was gone. No crime scene. No confession. No smoking gun. Only suspicion. And a trail that led, again and again, to Richard Bailey. He denied everything. He said they were just friends. He said he had nothing to do with her disappearance. But years later, 2 decades later, Bailey would be caught in the web of his own lies. In 1995, under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, he was charged with running a criminal enterprise involving fraud and conspiracy. In a moment of pressure, surrounded by federal prosecutors, Bailey made a chilling admission. "I believe Helen Brach is dead. And I believe she was murdered." That wasn't just a slip of the tongue. That was the first time anyone connected to Helen had admitted she was likely killed. But even now, we have no body. No burial. No closure. Her fortune remained untouched. Her will, executed as if she had died quietly in her sleep. Her legacy, shrouded in mystery. Helen Brach became more than a missing person. She became a symbol of how wealth, trust, and loneliness can mix into a deadly cocktail. Of how predators dress like gentlemen. And of how the richest woman in the room can still be the most vulnerable. Bailey was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Not for murder. There was no body to prove that. But for fraud. For deception. For the lives he ruined, including Helen's. He served his time. And walked free. But the question remains. Where is Helen Brach? The woman who had it all, and who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only candy wrappers, broken promises, and a hole in the world that no amount of money could ever fill. Helen Brach was declared legally dead in 1984, 7 years after her disappearance. There was no trial. No body. No final word. Just a signed paper, quietly closing the life of a woman who, by all accounts, had once controlled millions with the stroke of a pen. But death did not end her story. It only unlocked a darker one. Her estate, once valued at over $125 million, was finally distributed. Much of it went to charities, especially those involved in animal welfare, per her original wishes. But behind the polished surface of philanthropy, there were disputes. Questions of who knew what, and who profited most from her silence. Some friends of Helen claimed that she was planning to change her will. She had grown suspicious of the very people managing her fortune. And in the months leading up to her disappearance, she had begun asking dangerous questions, not just about horses or investments, but about people. People close to her. People with access. People with something to lose. Meanwhile, Richard Bailey continued to live lavishly for years, despite growing whispers and pressure. It wasn't until the 1990s, with renewed federal attention and deeper investigations into organized crime in the horse industry, that Bailey's empire began to crumble. In court, prosecutors painted a terrifying picture. A network of con
supposedly
artists,
traced to
trainers,
champions.
and brokers.
European
A
buying
system
trips
built on
filled
fraud,
formalized this commitment in
manipulation, and animal
1974,
cruelty.
establishing the
And
Helen V.
Brach,
Brach Found
a
Czech
woman
girl,
who knew too
now
much.
commanded wealth exceeding 100
Bailey,
million in
though
modern
never
purchasing
charged with her
power.
murder, was described by prosecutors as having conspired in her killing. But they lacked a body. They lacked physical evidence. So Bailey was sentenced to 30 years in prison for fraud and
About
racketeering.
Helen's fate.
He served over
The
15
investigation
years,
had
then
exposed
was released
organized
in
crime.
2019, at age 90. He walked free. Helen never did. But even as the legal chapters closed, her story
100-mile
refused to stay
journey she'd
buried.
made before for
In
routine
TV
medical
documentaries,
checkups.
true crime books, and secret FBI files, her name keeps reappearing, like a ghost that haunts the very world that once embraced her. What happened to Helen Brach? Was she pushed from a plane over Lake Michigan, as one
Horses to
chilling theory
victims
suggests?
while participating in
Was
the
she buried
insurance
under
murders that
concrete,
turned
fed to
million-dollar animals?
or cremated in some untraceable furnace? Or was her disappearance part of a larger machine, one that rewards silence and punishes women who ask too many questions? One investigator, decades later, said something that still echoes. We may never find Helen Brach. But we found what her story reveals. A world where elegance
Society
is a disguise.
pages featured her regularly
And
at
trust
charity
is the
galas,
deadliest vulnerability.
her donations flowing as freely
Helen
as the
Brach did
champagne.
everything a woman of her era was told would protect her. She married into wealth. She gave to charity. She lived discreetly. She trusted professionals. And when something felt wrong, she spoke up. And that, maybe more than anything else, is what got her killed. Because in a world ruled by men in suits and backroom deals, a woman asking questions wasn't seen as smart. She was seen as a threat. By the time federal agents began connecting dots, fraudulent horse deals, falsified insurance claims, a trail of elderly widows stripped of their savings, Helen's name was already a ghost in the file. She was the missing millionaire, the soft-spoken woman who got too close to the truth. And the deeper you go into her case, the clearer the pattern becomes. Silence was a currency. And Helen refused to pay. The men around her were predators. Some with criminal records. Some with smiles too charming to question. They operated in the shadows, behind stables and checkbooks, where power didn't look like violence, but it was. What makes Helen Brach's story so disturbing isn't just that she vanished. It's that so many people benefited from her vanishing. Her estate was eventually distributed. Her name was written into charitable foundations. Her disappearance turned into a footnote, instead of a scandal. And the world moved on.
View
But her
estate
absence
sprawled
still
across
lingers,
suburban
especially
Chicago's
for women
most
who live in
exclusive
her world.
neighborhood, while Winters brought
The world of
escape
wealth,
to her Florida.
influence, and trust built on fragile ground. Because if Helen Brach could disappear, any woman could. No matter how much money she had.
Arrived
No matter
whenever
how many
dire
causes she
circumstances
supported.
threatened closure or
No
expansion
matter how many
plans
horses
stalled.
she owned or how many staff answered her calls. Her story remains unresolved, not
Helen
because
had
the
threatened to
evidence is missing,
expose.
but
The
because the system
1994
decided not
indictment
to look hard
named
enough.
and systematic horse
Justice for
killing.
Helen was never truly about
Bailey
courts or
avoided trial by
convictions.
pleading so
It was
substantially
about
involved in the
acknowledging what
murder of
happens when
Helen
the wrong
Brach
people get too
that
close to the
maximum
right
punishment
woman.
was justified.
And in this case, the wrong people won. Helen Brach is gone. But her silence has a voice now. And it's telling us. Power without safety is a trap.
Completely
And
disappear
trust
from the
without
face of the
protection is
earth.
fatal.